Good afternoon. Welcome to today's SCA webinar with Dr. John Rosine on Deepwater Sedimentation and Stratigraphy. Before we start today's webinar, we'd like to ask a couple of questions about the demographics of the audience. So I'm launching the first poll question. What is your primary discipline? Results are coming in. It looks like we have quite a few geoscientists in the audience, no surprise. Still getting votes as people are joining and they're voting on their primary discipline. So most of you have voted at this point, so I'll go ahead and close and share the results. 96% geoscience, 4% other. So let's ask our next polling question. How many years of full-time experience do you have in the upstream oil and gas industry? Looks like we have a little broader spread on this question. There's answers in every category. We're still waiting for some people to respond. Most of you have voted now, so I'll close the poll, share the results. 18% have less than 1 year, 27%, 1 to 10 years, 13%, 11 to 20 years, 18%, 21 to 30 years, and 25% of you have over 30 years experience. So I'm going to share my slides and introduce John. And before I introduce John, I'd like to remind the audience that you will be muted today. And so we would like you to ask your questions during the presentation using the GoToWebinar question feature. And we'll cover those questions at the end of the presentation. So today's talk is on deepwater sedimentation and stratigraphy. Our speaker is Dr. John Rosine. John specializes in reservoir presence and quality forecasting. He's worked in both conventional and unconventional reservoirs. He's also worked for BP and several other supermajor and independent operators in a variety of basins around the world. John is very interested in exploration. He's currently the chair of the Houston Explorers Club, and he's been very involved in various organizations promoting the discipline of exploration. At Stanford University, he was the recipient of the Cy Muller Graduate Fellowship. So John teaches a class for SCA entitled Applied Deepwater Sedimentology and Stratigraphy. That's offered in a public setting this year, May 12th through 16th and October 13th through 17th. That's in SCA's Houston, Texas Training Center. It's a 5-day course, and you can see that it covers a number of different depositional settings, including basins in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. If you attend this course, you'll receive a copy of the book that John authored, Deepwater Sedimentary Systems Science, Discovery, and Applications, First Edition. We also have some in-person courses coming up in the near future. Dr. Steve Sonnenberg will be speaking on reservoir characterization for bedrock reservoirs. That's a 3-day class, May 5th through 7th in Houston, Texas. And Dr. Chris Zahm will speak on structural styles and interpretation in petroleum exploration and production, also the week of May 5th in Houston, Texas. And later in May 19th through 23rd, we have one of SCA's flagship courses, the Applied Subsurface Geological Mapping class that will be taught by Mark Olson and Jim Brennecke. We offer public classes, but of course classes can be taught in-house privately at your location. And we can also deliver some of our classes live online. So we have a number of different options for you. And don't forget that SCA also offers, in addition to training, consulting services, and technical recruiting. So I'm going to pass the presentation rights to John and let you start your presentation.
Thank you, Susan.
Looks good.
How does that look? Okay. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to thank SCA for this opportunity. It's a privilege to be here. Last time I discussed the variability in deepwater sedimentation using a variety of outcrop and subsurface examples. Today I'd like to discuss advanced topics and how deepwater sedimentation adds value throughout the oil and gas business. This will focus in part on how teamwork from various disciplines brings it all together and creates success in deepwater E&P. This talk is overdue. I've been wanting to present this material for some time. I hope you enjoy it and take away new SEDSTRAT skills. For more info on this course, please see the SCA website. This talk is dedicated to my dear friend, colleague, and mentor, Cheryl Collareni, who passed on this last August. She was incredible. There were few who understood the business as well as she did. She was one of the most successful engineers and investors I've ever known. She worked all over the world with diverse teams, and she impacted me and my teams in a great way. As she often said, it takes a village to win in their energy business. This talk's focus today is on that village of expertise used to unlock value in deepwater sedimentary basins. This is part of our formula for success in deepwater E&P. There are multiple objectives today. As I see it, one of my jobs is to bring the diverse world of deepwater to you, condense the jargon to make it useful. You've probably heard of partner meetings derailing because two teams from different companies couldn't decide on how to divide a submarine fan. My goal is to present that complexity, distill it so that you can use it to add value. This class highlights several themes, basically the outline of the book at the right. This is what we showed to show what you learn over a 15-year career training program at a super major. We really want to solve this problem on how to best explore deep water and to bring in the best team and people from around the world to do it, and not just show the Shell or ExxonMobil or Stanford way, but to bring in diverse perspectives. People and teams who do each one of these bullet points very well run the most successful companies. Why this is important today is that while it encourages subject matter experts to dive deep into their area of expertise to drive value, it emphasizes that we need to work together to create successful E&P programs. They say the MVP of the team is the one who recognizes the value of all the others on the team. So get up, get out of your office, work with your peers to create successful programs that are greater than the sum of their parts. Exploration is not done in a vacuum or by one person sitting in an office. It's a team effort, especially in deep water when the risk and uncertainty are so high, but the reward's so great. As Steve Call mentions in Private Empire, most of the value creation in oil and gas resides in the upstream. A huge thank you to this group of entrepreneurs who think differently than the consensus about deep water and its incredible value. This is about a third of our group with 62 authors repping 20 countries. In my opinion, the finest geos, engineers, and economists in the world. I hope you get to know them, and I hope you get to work with all of them. They designed and delivered this first ever treatise, now available in STEM universities worldwide, thanks to the tremendous job done by our publisher, Elsevier. Many people ask, how do you learn about deepwater E&P? By being part of the global community. Big basin openers don't just happen in the Gulf, but around the world, as shown in this map by Henry and Paul in Cheryl's chapter of the book. This list was just being published as Guyana, Suriname, and Namibia were heating up. If you believe the work by some famous economists, this map will probably look a heck of a lot busier by the time we hit either peak supply or peak demand. In this class, we cover a number of these super basins. Deep water defined by BOEM is greater than 1,000 feet. Some company websites anywhere between 300 and 600 feet. In our book, we say 200 meters. How many feet are in a meter? In the wise words of the famous theologian Nate Bargatze, no one knows. So this is where deepwater E&P is working. In some frontier basins, the discoveries aren't working out as we'd hoped. frontier exploration is tough, often as explorers were surprised in a good or amazing way. Mega kudos to Galp for Mopane, or were let down, like with the recent $400 million write-down by Shell for the Pel 39 discoveries. Sometimes it's an outright kick in the gut, as Hukla explains in The Explorer's Mindset, which is by far most of the time for frontier. Why did Shell have such a large write-down despite having such high reservoir storage in these discoveries? Two ideas have been circulated. First, it could be the presence of a possible reservoir quality reducing mineral such as chlorite, or a highly tortuous reservoir architecture. More info on that later. But also second, potentially large amounts of gas, which would add to the development costs as well as the fluid being close to bubble point. The petroleum being close to bubble point, meaning that production will involve a lot of gas, is a problem because you can't flare gas in a lot of countries. This is a petroleum fluid phase diagram with a typical hydrocarbon composition profile in a deepwater basin, showing that as you add temperature and pressure, you move from a condensate gas ratio on the right to gas oil ratio on the left, and then with a lot of pressure, you reach a supercritical fluid. For those interested in learning more about deepwater fluid systems, see Ben and Andy's chapter of the book. They focus on bottom-up and top-down modeling. But before source rocks, what sets up the basin to be prospective? What controls the overall architecture and synergizes with the range of fills? First and foremost, tectonic setting. And deepwater sedimentary systems exist in all of the following tectonic settings. Ray Ingersoll is the pioneer in this space, having recently condensed some of his life's work into a greater than 600-page book. Those of you who know me well know I like to hear the history of how exploration has evolved, so whenever I can, I try to include stories of great explorers like Ray. Much of the exploration done today offshore targets embankment settings, such as the Gulf or some Atlantic margins, with shelf slope rise geometries made interesting by the presence of mobile substrates like salt or shale. However, onshore exploration targets ancient deepwater intervals, and that involves a wide variety of tectonic settings from the Rocky Mountain foreland or transform settings on our west coast. In our class, we use this panel to track the types of basins we study in class from basin to basin, looking at the sedimentology and how it changes. This is also a useful technique for explorers with a global portfolio. One class exercise examines petrographic data and sees how that changes with the evolving tectonic setting. Let's take a look at where some of the big discoveries, and most, have been made in the last 2 decades. In rifted passive margins, it's imperative to understand these because greater than 2/3 of the giant oil and gas fields have been found here. They have an aggregate length of over 105,000 kilometers, more than 62,000 miles, which is more than active margins and spreading centers together. We know most about them because of deep penetrating seismic by energy companies, as well as wells drilled by those same companies. They have an average sedimentary thickness of 3 to 4 kilometers, and there are 4 conceptual modern models for how these form, detailed by Paul Mann in this chapter. There are a number of remaining debates and questions on rifted passive margins. For instance, where do you draw the COB and COT for modeling purposes? Are volcanic rifted passive margins and rifted passive margins equivalent in their petroleum potential? What about each side of a conjugate? The jury's still out on these, but there's a clear bias, and you'll have to learn about that in class. These are important questions to understand how to think about starting to divide the offshore for bid rounds for various federal governments from the US to Uruguay. Many recent deepwater successes have been found in a specific subset of rifted passive margins, and those are passive margin fold belts. These are zones of gravitational collapse along low angle detachment surfaces, roughly 2 to 4 degrees, with up-dip extension on the shelf, translation on the slope, and compression on the basin floor. That was termed by Mark in 2004. These can be tens to hundreds of kilometers in width and length. These host giant oil and gas fields, shown by these red and yellow dots from Alaminos Canyon to Viasca Knoll. If you take the Atwater, Mississippi fold belt, for instance, this has some giant fields with some really fun names to say: Tahiti, Knotty Head, Thunder Horse, to name a few. For passive margin fold belts in this class, we typically focus on the Gulf, as well as offshore Africa and the South Atlantic. Over the last several years, working with Paul Mann's CBTH consortium at UH, it's been awesome to see this research get published and get notoriety around the world. One specific PMFB we focus on in this class is the Pelotas Basin. Daniel Maya and Joshua Miller have made great strides in understanding this turbidite-chondrite system. It's been awesome to see them work together. And to continue to build on this topic of passive margin fold belts, let's discuss salt. Most of the big discoveries in passive margin fold belts have a salt attachment, not shale. These include fields to the right, from Mars to Mad Dog. Huge strides have been made in understanding salt tectonics and dispelling earlier models that are bad, like the flat top salt deposition model, and making great strides in understanding how the structures actually work, from sheets to canopies, stocks, anticlines, and turtles. It's hard to imagine a Gulf or South Atlantic oil field that doesn't show presence of mobile substrate like salt. So if you work offshore, you need to have an understanding of how these operate. There are more than 20 deepwater basins around the world where salt plays a key role in the petroleum system. And by far, syn exhumation salt basins have the richest accumulation of structures that are great for oil and gas exploration. As Hudak and Jackson have shown, salt changes about everything in deep water, from routing systems, migration pathways, heat flow, bathymetry. It guides currents both downslope and alongslope. In the Gulf, we look at different compressional styles, from salt cord folds, salt sheets, rojos, thrusts, mini basins, things like that. If you're interested in thrusts and mega flaps, check out the work Jan Gavio and I do each summer in France. So for processes that operate in and around salt, and pretty much in deep water anywhere, there are three primary dynamic behaviors with corresponding sediment support mechanisms and flow types. Here they're arranged in a diagram. This is a slightly beefier diagram than what existed prior to the Deepwater book. The three dynamic behaviors are fluid, mixture transitional, and plastic, with corresponding sediment support mechanisms from fluid turbulence to cohesion derived from clays. And that corresponds to the flow type from turbidity current all the way to debris flow. That determines the deposit from turbidite to debrite, and that is a primary control on porosity and permeability. While plastic behavior is very rarely responsible for producing high-quality conventional reservoirs, mixture transitional and fluid dynamic behaviors create a lot of great beds for conventional reservoirs. We'll take a look at those in the next slide. My colleagues Javier, Antoine, and Marco and I designed this chapter on gravitational processes because exploration programs globally still worship this in exploration programs. But I still think there's a lot we haven't figured out about downslope or gravitational processes. For instance, the proliferation of bed models derived from mixed or transitional flow. And that's not to be confused with mixed deepwater depositional systems, which we'll discuss in a few slides. So what are the typical building blocks of a deepwater reservoir or seal? Here they're arranged in 4 columns, with turbidites on the left, transitional flow deposits next, contourites and reworked beds in the 3rd column, and then finally, shallow marine and fluvial modified beds. Note that most of them fine upward, with the exception of some of the contourites. A lot of them have sandy parts and muddy parts, meaning that if you've got a thick accumulation of sand deposits, you could have a high quality or thick column. But conversely, if you have a lot of mud, take for instance Bauma TDE intervals or the Stowe and Shamagod model in the lower left, those can make great seals. Talk to Andy and Ben more about that. So what? Each of these different beds has different porosity permeability profiles and reservoir architectural styles. Take for instance the argillaceous sandstone bed, made famous by the Deepwater Paleogene Wilcox in the Gulf. This is the default first carrier bed in the Gulf, as well as it forms widespread sheety reservoirs. That is very different from the low-like deposits, which typically deposit within channels, which has big implications for how you draw your GDE or EOD maps. We look at all these beds and cores and outcrops, and so you'll be well versed in them after the 5-day course. You'll probably be dreaming about them. Speaking of GDE, in this course, you're presented with data sets from upslope, downslope, and on to off axis, and asked to interpret the distribution of facies in the deepwater system. By the end of the course, you'll have an appreciation for outer shelf environments, canyon, channel, levee, overbank, lobe, splay. This is one such diagram we show what a normal submarine fan or submarine valley depositional system looks like. Compose each of those depositional environments or morphological elements. That's the fancy term. It also shows what these deposits look like if you were to slice through them like a cake, exposing their internal anatomy. But this is the model, and because all models are wrong, this one's definitely useful. It's our job as explorers to find out where nature diverges from this model. That'll give us an edge and exploration. These fans become much more complex with the addition of faults on the seafloor or mobile substrate. Take, for example, how does a channel levee system respond to faults on the Niger Delta slope? What are the implications for reservoir presence? There have been studies on this, and we discussed those in class. In this section of the course, we show where high reservoir quality portions of the submarine fans are, in part using process-based stratigraphic modeling designed by and patented by my Chevron colleagues who helped me write this chapter. However, what happens when you have flows that are not only oriented downslope, but along slope? Years ago, it was okay just to be a turbidite specialist. You could go a long way helping companies make huge discoveries offshore. Today, that's not the case. Now you need to know how bottom currents work too. And it's not just in the South Atlantic and offshore East Africa, but it's globally, even though that's where the big discoveries have been made so far. Bottom current modified systems are one of the most exciting dogma-busting play openers in the last decade. Bottom currents, aka contour currents, have been recognized in many basins around the world to distribute and remove fine material, with the downslope-oriented systems gaining the most traction. Why is that? Because with the gravitational systems, you're bringing all the sediment into the basin, and then you're removing the fines or the grunge, leaving a really highly refined reservoir fraction on the seafloor. So this has, recalibrated exploration programs globally to look for these gravitational systems along continental margins that are then reworked by bottom currents. For example, plays in the Atlantic and offshore East Africa, including Coral Mamba and Tortuga Mayhem. The dislocation is that many of these plays didn't get extended to different basins over the last 1 to 2 decades until recently, but there was a good dislocation for some time that some exploration groups profited from a great deal. It doesn't just stop there about what mixed systems could be. This diagram shows muddy deposits grading into potentially sandier ones in these contourite terraces at the interface between these two ocean water masses. We'll focus in on this orange area next. What does that say? MTD? MTDs, or deposits resulting from single events of sediment-laden flows with laminar behavior, including slide slumps and debris flow. These have three main parts: the head wall, the translational, and the toe. The terms are often used interchangeably, but multiple MTD that are genetically related are MTC. There are other exotic forms of deep water resedimentation too, such as injectites. A great outcrop example made famous by Andrew is the Pinocchi Hills giant injectite complex, or when you have unlithified material ejecting onto the seafloor, such as mud volcanoes. As mentioned by Tiago Alves in this chapter, and Mason Dijkstra, these are associated with and form many different types of deep water play types. Mostly due to the accommodation formed by the removal of sediment. These form great top fill targets. People didn't really understand these at a granular level until some awesome researchers worked around the world creating high resolution maps in some great outcrops in New Zealand, like where I work every winter. This is the Rapa Nui mass transport deposit that Sebastian Cardona mapped. We mapped part of this one in class. That's a doozy of an exercise. Giant oil and gas fields have been associated with MTD for years too. Take, for instance, Thunder Horse. This was documented by BP workers several years ago. First to sink people will tell you that if you increase the amount of clay to the system, either due to changes in the catchment or the nature of the sediment transport processes, you'll increase the amount of MTD in the basin. Let's talk a little bit more about source to sink next. Source to sink represents one of the most state-of-the-art disciplines for reducing uncertainty in deepwater oil and gas exploration today. It is a suite of techniques that examine catchment to basin on generation, transport, composition, distribution, and timing of sedimentation from ancient to modern. Many of these techniques are quicker and more cost-effective than a brand new 3D. If you love working with super smart brainiacs on a team, like Eugene, Laura, and Lauren, who are responsible for this chapter, this is for you. It's multidisciplinary by nature, and it asks some great questions, like how much sediment will be delivered to this part of the basin at what time? What will the reservoirs be composed of? How will they undergo diagenesis? What thermochron techniques can we deploy to understand the source rock generation and accumulation? The biggest thing you need to be aware of here is garbage in, garbage out for these models. You need to have robust data for using source to sink modeling. How we apply it in this course is we look at changes in grains and mineralogy from the catchment to the Deepwater Basin. We also look at a variety of different deepwater systems and how that relates back to petroleum risk segment mapping or critical risk segment mapping. Several systems we discuss include the Gulf, the Alpine Foreland Basin, of course the Taranaki, and some basins in Southern California. So you get to examine with a source to sink lens many different types of tectonic settings. Some people say deep water is divorced from relative sea level. Others say you'll always find the signal. This class discusses the merits and limitations of each, using examples like the Holocene offshore California and Indus, all the way to the Deepwater Gulf. Two people who have made the most sense of the multiple languages spoken by sequence stratigraphers over the years included Art Donovan in his 2010 paper, where he equated it to the Tower of Babel, and Octavian Cutunianu. Let's talk about some of Octavian's achievements. He also has a very successful book on sequence stratigraphy with Elsevier. This diagram shows the variability in deep water sedimentation in 3 well locations, and it shows the cyclicity between different types of deposits related back to process. Probably the best term, as Octavian uses in this chapter of the book, is stratigraphic and sedimentologic cyclicity. So who cares about being able to predict what are these rock types based on relative sea level and position of the shoreline? Well, anyone interested in making observations, testing those by drilling a well, and potentially finding new resource. So if you're working offshore, you need to have a working understanding of sequence stratigraphy and all the pitfalls. I think one of the most interesting things we've seen over the last decade is when gravitational and bottom current professionals and people who specialize in sequence stratigraphy come together to try to interpret the many different types of surfaces we have in deep water basins. When you have tectonics and bottom currents lining up, oftentimes they overlap, but when those aren't working together, sometimes the surfaces don't line up. So we still don't have everything figured out yet about every deep water basin offshore. For field valuation, oil and gas in place is in part controlled by porosity and a number of other factors. So reservoir quality is an essential element for determining how much oil you have in place, determining how much your field is worth in dollars. This is a QFR plot by Lander that shows some of the most productive reservoirs in the world. This was pioneered by Dickinson and his Stanford team back in the 70s. Think people like Ray. And it's one effective way of interpreting provenance from medium grain sand. As you can see, we've got more arc-derived material from Veracruz. Think Zama, way to go, Mark. We've got a lot of continental or basement uplift for the Campos. Think Albacore Leste and Roncador fields. And then a lot of continental interior reworks. That would be fields like Thunder Horse and some of those other Miocene fields we saw on the salt tectonic slide. At the base, this is grain size distribution for those major petroleum producing intervals. As Roger Slatt demonstrated years ago, the coarser the grain size you get and the better sorted it is, the higher the porosity and permeability. So how do we find those? It's by integrating carefully the sedimentary process and the submarine geomorph and merging those two. And that's why the process goes so well together to determine where the high reservoir quality parts of the deepwater basin. The combination of factors discussed in this part of the course help determine ultimate recovery and in turn the capital requirements and overall valuation of the project. I'd like to talk about other biological processes that also determine porosity and permeability, such as burrowing. This is the study of ichnology. As Francis, Olmo, and Javier tell us, trace fossils are the products of organisms moving on or below the seafloor. This gives info on the depositional environment, from sedimentation rate, salinity, bottom water oxygenation, just to name a few. Traces refer to burrows, borings, etchings, even things like coprolites, but not eggs or embedment structures. These traces reflect the behavior of organisms. In this chapter, Francis shows us that zoophycus tend to accumulate in offshore, very low energy settings, such as the outer shelf. But if you have a Nereides ichnofacies association, you're likely in the basin floor. So far as we know, mixed systems have somewhere in between the amount of burrowing you'll find in calcareous chondritic systems, which have a lot, versus turbidite systems, which probably have the least, but it varies from basin to basin. Where this really matters is in mapping EOD, but also in reservoir quality. Take, for instance, this micro CT scan of macronicnus burrows. Here we see elevation of porosity in the tube rim as opposed to the tube core. This is what how my pastor would describe taking it to the HNL, or the whole nother level of bioturbation index. How we incorporate this into this class is by looking at core and outcrop, recognizing the ichnofacies, determining a first level reservoir quality prediction, and then relating that back to EOD. But what about the actual bugs? By the way, actually, did you know that Francis, the lead author for this chapter, is a 2:20 marathoner? I don't care who you are, that is blazing fast. The biostratigrapher, if not your best friend in the company, should be at least one of your very good friends in the company. Definitely getting a holiday card. Typically, most companies have one to a few of them, and they're spread out over a global portfolio, so they're super busy. Biostrat data can be confusing. They can save you from bad correlations and millions of dollars wasted. As a stratigrapher, I've learned over the years to incorporate it not only for its primary tool in correlation, but also for determining ecozonations and refining my GDE maps. Here's the simple workflow. Identify the age changes, compare the age differences, assess the confidence and especially the durability of the bioevent. And if all those work out, you can start to move towards localized events. Thanks to Ryan Weber for teaching me that. At the right, these are two wells that show correlations in the absence of biostrat data. Once the biostrat data came in, you can see that the correlations need to be reassessed. This can change everything from the sequence strat, the reservoir model, the sedimentology, the stratigraphy. So biostrat is best used in the hands of a bold explorer. In the wise words of oil finders on the North Slope in offshore West Africa, think like a drop of oil. When you take this explorer's mindset to the geophysicist, they say, well, can we image it and can we measure it? Bringing us to this part of our exploration portfolio, to imaging and interpretation of deep water sedimentary systems. Sumit Verma led and delivered this chapter. Many thanks to Derek Adams for reviewing it. For years, people chased bright spots with great success and failure. Today, more sophisticated methods are needed. The key point I'd like to make here is that the better you are with the technology and the software, the better you'll be able to show, for instance, reservoir presence and distribution around the basin to investors so they invest in your prospect. This focuses on interpreting seismic reflection data as well as using attributes, including dip magnitude, azimuth, coherence, coherent energy, SPEC-D, and some machine learning and artificial intelligence methods. Second, Per Avseth shows us how to use AVO to distinguish between oil-filled and gas-filled and places you wouldn't want to drill in a deep water basin. And thirdly, the man, Tom Fett, teaches us how to use image logs to better define what rocks are in the subsurface. We incorporate this in at least two parts in the class. First, you're given a coherence volume and you need to map out different play fairways in a deep water gas producing basin. And then there's a number of examples where we compare image logs to actual core for correlation. As an explorer, you learn very quickly you need to team up with geniuses like Anshuman, Per, and Tapan to convert your geological observations to geophysical parameters that are routinely gathered in deep water offshore areas. Rock physics is this link. Anshuman demonstrates that there are far fewer geophysical observations like VP, VS, and density than geological parameters like cement volume, sorting, net to gross, porosity. The big question is, how do we integrate the sedimentologic and rock physics data to predict reservoir properties using seismic data? The observations we make in this class as stratigraphers and reservoir quality specialists go directly into the modeling of the velocity and will help us show what are the fluid-filled parts of the field. There are two ways to put all the data we've discussed so far in this presentation together to achieve modeling nirvana. And those next two things I'd like to talk about are forward stratigraphic modeling and basin and petroleum systems modeling. In this course, one of my main goals for participants is to show you how to make observations that will assist in the valuation of the subsurface. The observations you make for prospect can also go into developing this living archive, a rich treasure trove of data in FSM and BPSM. The two main goals of this are to understand petroleum generation to accumulation, but also other things like rock mechanics, chemical diagenesis, pore pressure prediction. We don't just work passive margins in this course, we work some really tricky transform basins too. One theme we carry throughout the course is one of my favorite deepwater intervals, one of the thickest accumulation of deepwater intervals anywhere in the world for this specific time frame, The Plio-Pleistocene Pico and Repetto Formation, which is part of the supergiant billion-barrel Ventura Rincon trend that's both onshore and offshore. We discuss workflows and calibration in BPSM, and by the time you've made observations on the cores and outcrops for the Plio-Pleistocene Pico and Repetto Formation, then we can start to put it to work into some of these maps routinely used in these two modeling techniques, making this class not only a really good one for people wishing to take their SEDSTRAT to the next level, but also basin modelers. Let's talk a little bit more about giant discoveries in California. Deepwater used to be at the end of this pier in Summerland, California. Now it's in 3,000 meters water depth with stones in the Gulf. It used to be 14 feet of water offshore Creole, Louisiana, out of sight, out of mind. Now it's 3,400 meters water depth with the Rye well offshore Uruguay. Why do we do deep water? Just for fun? No, because there's a strong business case. The crazy explorers see something, as Rich Sears would call these hey lookies. Hey, check that out. Hey, look at this. Build a geologic concept, a business case, show it to partners. Hopefully it goes through and you get to drill it. Sometimes you open up a whole new trend. Rich discussed this at the GCS SCPM Foundation Perkins Rosen Research Conference at Equinor in 2023, as well as GeoGulf. I'd like to discuss three truisms here put forth by the authors of this chapter. First, oil is where you find it, be it in jungles, the desert, or in this case, deep water. Second, there's always been a deep water in the oil and gas business. And then third, when you enter a new production play, it takes technological innovation and engineering advancements to produce it safely. I think one of the biggest things that people get as an aha moment in this course is the observations they make can determine these multi-billion-dollar final investment decisions that determine these big platforms, floaters offshore that will produce oil and gas safely for multiple decades. So you get to see how your work in this course in prospecting gets carried through to these FID to create these really high value, high IRR projects in deep water. And that's why deep water makes so much money. This talk is in memory of Cheryl. She was the lead author for this chapter, which sums up the entirety of the book and explains why we know so much about deep water sedimentary systems. It's because they're so profitable for investors, shareholders, and companies. Many of you know, if you've taken an oil and gas economics course, that IRR for deep water developments can far exceed conventional fields onshore and far exceed shale developments onshore. Not many people can do what Dunn did with Crown Quest and Lime Rock. Why is deep water worth investing in? It's because reserve density can be so high, as explained in this chapter. Those with some of the highest reserve densities include Mars Ursa, Kazamba, Mad Dog, Atlantis, Ram Powell, to name a few. The theme in this course discusses some of the SEDSTRAT for these giant oil and gas fields, some of them which change the economies for the better of entire countries. The nature of transport processes, turbidity currents, spreads out these wide deposits that are sometimes quite thick. It's very different than trying to target one small channel sand in the Almond Formation in Wyoming. The recovery efficiencies can also be quite high in deep water, exceeding 40 to 65%. What is it for unconventional shale? About 4 to 8%, sometimes 10 to 12%. Wherever you work in a company, it's important to know the revenues, the costs, the profits to understand where the value creation is being done. Exploration is one of those great value creators. So this chapter allows you to project out finances for a couple decades, but what about even farther out? Take maybe 100 years? Let's imagine what deep water offshore areas could look like in 100 years. Cindy and I often play this game at our short courses. Those of you that were with us for the Bill Haley Memorial Short Course in Abilene and Fort Worth last year know what I'm talking about. The possibilities are really endless. And new energy resources, aquaculture, subsurface storage, infrastructure, environmental resources, even monitoring. Interestingly, when people tell me they got the book, the investors tell me this is the first chapter they read because they want to be able to predict the future. In the next 100 years, as described by Cindy and her co-authors, including Zach Donovan, it'll be important to apply the explorer's mindset to all these new and emerging forms of how we use the offshore. Many of the things that are going to be done haven't even been imagined yet. Geoscience skills will be critical to the success in each of these endeavors. I've mentioned the explorer's mindset. What is it? To bring it all together, we'd have none of this business in deep water unless these crazy explorers had ideas on what to test in the subsurface. These hey lookies, hey look at that reflector, opened up new basins, new play fairways, and are the reason we're gathered here today. The explorer's mindset, coined by Cindy in her 2000 AAPG Distinguished Lecture, explains that with creativity, technical excellence, business acumen, and ability to tell a story and bring people along, and with persistence, grace, and tenacity, you can be a productive explorer, adding value to your company and bringing energy and prosperity to the world. But it's not just exploration geos responsible for this business. It's many disciplines from engineering to finance and legal working together to make this business happen. These are just some of the faces of leaders in E&P. I'm fortunate to know them. This community, our community, plays in deep water where we feel we have an edge. There's a lack of subsurface data, direct measurements compared to onshore, so it pays to pay attention to the explorer's mindset and use of multiple working models. These professionals have also worked a lot of basins around the world, so they understand how wacky deep water systems can be from basin to basin. I think it was Louis Pasteur that said chance favors the prepared mind. I feel like I get that now. It's when preparation meets opportunity. These folks have been deep into deep water, just out of natural curiosity, for some of them their entire lives. When you're that deep into something, not just for the money, as many are, the discoveries show up more often. This causes us to be surprised when we see things saying, hey, that doesn't fit the paradigm, that doesn't fit the model. What is this hey looky? These people are unique and they're using their skills to be their best every day. It's been a privilege to show a glimpse into our deep water community today, and I hope you have great success in deep water. I'd like to answer any questions you may have. Thanks.
Thanks, John. And thanks to our audience for attending today's webinar. I want to remind you that you are muted. So if you would like to ask John some questions, you need to type them in the question feature and go to webinar. Later today, you will receive a link to a recording of today's webinar, an evaluation form, and a link to registration details for Dr. Rosine's class, Applied Deepwater Sedimentology and Stratigraphy, which is offered May 12th through 16th and October 13th through 17th in Houston, Texas. Let's go to the questions.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm just going to help John with the question piece here. So thanks for a brilliant delivery here. We've got a lot of questions. I actually have a lot of questions of my own that I jotted down as I was listening, John. So great presentation. Thank you. I'm just curious, you just covered the topics that 61 of you and your best friends wrote about deep water. I mean, you did that in 50 minutes or even 45. So how do you cover this many themes in your course? What's the trick, and how do you tie them all to sedimentology and stratigraphy?
I've got to credit all my friends and mentors and business partners, but if you can do SEDSTRAT well, you can help out all these different disciplines that go into successful E&P across the upstream value chain. So it doesn't matter if you're, creating an AVO model, or you're trying to determine oil and gas in place, looking at diagenetic fabrics or estimating net to gross, refining the basin model, you can play a key role in it. And just if you're good at SEDSTRAT, you can generate those insights that make you a good company, and you can compete in the upstream space. So that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but yeah, it was fun to put together the book and work with so many talented people and figure really what's the formula to success with all these different skill sets involved in the world of exploration.
Thank you, John. That's great. I have a question from the audience. Deep water is typically associated with reservoir, just kind of in informal speech. But the question is, how do you identify source? What are the factors that you use to identify source rocks?
Ooh, source rocks. Great question. Not my specialty, but Andy and Ben, I've learned a lot from them. Typically looking for some bright reflections in some of the spec data, very deep in the basin, pretty continuous, just because they concentrate so much organic matter. So that's the quick way to look for them. But yeah, going into frontier basins, source is probably the big question that most people ask, because if you don't have that, you won't have any oil and gas production in the future. But I'm happy to talk about that later too.
Thank you. I think that's a great tip. Now, you refer to process-based models. What does that mean?
A good understanding of how you can sort different grain sizes, how they're transported, how far they'll flow into the basin based on the geometry. It's pretty high tech. Some of this stuff is patented, but
Mhm.
companies are going into this space to figure out um, what are the rock types associated with their seismic data. So they can find where the high porosity zones, where the high permeability zones based on grain size and just first principles. So I got to work with Caldwell and Goggin on that for chapter 8, and to show how that can add value in exploration and production.
So it just taking the topic, stretching a little bit into broader themes here. So why publish a Deepwater book of the explorer's mindset? Why not keep those secrets for your own competitive edge or for the next EMP company?
That's a good question. Thanks,
Mm.
Dr. Oliveira Riley. It's nice to see that people are reading the books and adopting the language and adopting the workflows and thinking. So it's nice to see that around the world. I get a lot of comments about it every week. I guess we could have kept it to ourselves and maybe had a competitive advantage, but I think it's good to get the info out there, because it's better for all of us working in deep water offshore areas, to have better methods to explore and be more profitable enterprises. As Rich Sears has told me, you're not so much competing with other companies in exploration, you're competing with the earth.
Mm.
Whereas midstream and downstream, it's very low profit margins, lower internal rate of return, and so it's undifferentiated projects. But in exploration, if you know the earth the best, you'll be winning.
Wow, so competing with the earth, that's a big challenge.
Has an infinite way of humbling us.
I see. So, what do you think surprised you the most about putting together the Deepwater Systems book?
Oh gosh, that's a long story. I think if the pandemic hadn't happened, we probably wouldn't have written it. But there was an opportunity there in a very dark time in Earth's history where we were able to come together and work on something that mattered to us. I probably talked to about 200 people to see if they wanted to be a part of it once we got the editor team together with some of my former bosses and friends from Shell and BP and academia. And so we had the core group together, and then we ended up with, 61 awesome people that were incredibly passionate about talking about deep water. So they feel deep water. They're very bullish about deep water. Originally, Elsevier asked us to write 600 pages. We ended up writing 800. And it just shows you how much people were willing to pour into this effort to really provide high quality information to just help the world explore better in deep water.
That's fantastic. Wow, what an experience. So, using the explorer's mindset, what predictions might you offer for the for Deepwater breakthroughs of the future?
That's great. Some companies have adopted this as their new theme. That's nice to see. I think it just takes out of the box thinking. There's a number of people in that book that talk about out of the box thinking because there is no box. Paragraph Seth had said that. So that creative element is a key element. It helps to think about, well, if you look at, for instance, oil prices too, they're not just extrapolations of past and present prices. They're very jagged. And so no one's
Mhm.
really any good about predicting them, in part because the supply and demand curves are so steep. But we could see big changes in the offshore. But I think again, it comes back to that Louis Pasteur quote, preparation
Mhm.
and opportunity. When they come together, they work well. So I think that this deep water community, as long as we keep studying it, the opportunities are just going to show up. I don't really know what those are going to look like. I wish I had a better crystal ball, but I know I love it. I feel blessed to know people around the world that also love it. So we have a good time brainstorming about what it could look like. As Cindy calls it, it's mind candy. I think she had a ton of fun writing that chapter. I
Yeah,
think we talked about estimating out 30 years, and then it was like, well, let's just go with something ridiculous, 100 years, and she did it with her team, which is pretty incredible to me.
that's fantastic. Well, so let's leave the crystal ball and go back to maybe your experience. And what do you think is the most recent breakthrough that you were a part of or that you witnessed, yeah, develop in kind of in front of your eyes in your recent experience?
Well, one I can definitely talk about is just being a part of the Drifters Research Group with Javier. He brings in a global community and does it very well, and so everyone is very open to sharing about their experiences and data and how deep water basins evolve based on gravitational and along slope processes. And so I think that is just a rich discussion that's been ongoing. Again, feel very blessed to be a part of that group. So it's changed my mind. I think coming out of Stanford, uh, like 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 some of our research group, we just think in a downslope mindset. And now to be a part of Javier's team and Wouter and Deborah and all those other students and researchers and Sarah, they've really opened my mind about how deep water can be quite different than what I thought it was just 5 to 10 years ago working at Stanford.
Excellent. Well, that's really nice. That integration with a lot of different people from diverse backgrounds coming together. I think I've experienced myself. It just brings a richness. Um, Let me just ask one more question. So you mentioned that part of the workflows that you would need to make maps to basement or even to the moho. And then you showed us some thin sections and bioturbation, and you suggested that we needed to integrate biostratigraphy. I mean, how do you integrate across these scales? You're talking moho, right? Continental scale or oceans scale, and then you bring us down to these thin sections. Help me understand how that works in your workflows and why
Well,
it matters. I mean, do they really connect? Where do they connect?
depends on the question. But yeah, these are all teammates and team members I've had throughout the years from new ventures, exploration, appraisal, production, development. And so, just depending on the scale of your project, if it's a very small scale, maybe you might be looking at micro CT scans of burrows and ichnofacies distribution to find out where the most productive of your deep water point bars are. But if you're looking at, depth of moho, you're finding, well, how far out could we put the petroleum system potentially? Where might we lease or where might we write to which foreign country that they might offer us offshore acreage? And so it's just all part of the workflow. And I think the more tuned in you are with more of your colleagues across the business, the more you'll be able to help. So again, I guess it's just about listening. If somebody asked me, like, you wrote that explorer's mindset book, what do you think the best explorers do? And I just said, well, they listen. They listen to all their team members. They listen to their peers. They listen to the earth. They're not always talking. I probably talked too much today.
That is a good tip. Well, thank you for that. Now, you teach these courses, and I imagine after the interaction, people come to you and ask you to, help us with the prospectivity of our basin. How do you handle that?
Uh, that question used to surprise me. Thanks for that. I think it starts with open, honest communications with the entire team about the skills, the goals, the aims, the dreams. And once you have those laid out in a timeline, then you can start to address some more of these technical questions, which are the really big and valuable questions. And so I think, having that whole team together and sit down and understanding each other's challenges is a big part of it. And that seems to have worked in the long run so far.
Mhm. So on a more practical, question, do you consult through SCA as well?
Yeah.
Are you available for consultations there too? Great.
Yeah.
So people are signing up for your course, and I know some are looking forward to taking this course coming up in May. What should be their expectations for before and after?
Got it. I guess some of the feedback that I've gotten is it's a pretty busy course. You'll be doing a lot of stuff. You'll be getting up, you'll be moving around, you'll be interpreting some big some big panels, some big sections. You'll be working together with partners and teammates to deliver some of the course exercises. So I try to break that up with the lecture and the talks and the PowerPoint, and balance that with Q&A, and then also the exercise. So you come away from it, hopefully after 5 days, feeling much more confident in your abilities to interpret deep water systems and the range and variability, the size and scale, and how you can really help your company. And so I hope you feel enriched and enthused about the whole process. Sometimes I'm really enthusiastic, and I hope that rubs off. But yeah, I hope you just love deep water. So one funny thing, one of these courses, I've got some long panels, and one time I went to the printer, and we've got these like 15-foot panels to interpret. And so everyone walked home with some wallpaper, essentially, of a deep water strat trap. And so I hope they enjoy that. But yeah, that's never happened. So every course is a little bit different. I'm always changing out information. So I try to keep it new and fresh.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to that. Just wanted to change it up a bit and, share with us something that exciting that people don't know about you. You're besides rocks and stratigraphy, I know there's other things in your life. So can you share something with us?
Yeah, I was a punk rock drummer. We cut 2 albums. Well, it was like an album and a half because we had some overlapping songs. And now I'm trying out for my church band, and I can guarantee you we're not going to be playing any punk rock drumming on Sundays.
For sure. So, and also besides, family and work, what else is something that, you'd like to devote a lot of time to?
Um, I like to do Xterra triathlons, and I love to do ocean open water swim races. I love to race in Hawaii, so if there's ever an opportunity to get to Hawaii, I just love racing there because of the humidity and the terrain, the oceans. I think it's nice.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we're just coming to the end of the time here. Let me just ask one last question, regarding the topics that you share with us. What offshore exploration or new venture areas would you like to see?
Oh my gosh. I love what Charles Sternbach has done with giant fields. I would love to explore more of that continent ocean boundary, continent ocean transition. Mega kudos to Total Energies for some of their discoveries offshore in Namibia. Would love to see that stuff. The Barents has always been fascinating to me. I would like to see more data from there.
Fantastic. Well, and we're getting pretty much to the top of the hour, and we've had a very full and rich discussion, John. So I just wanted to thank you for a great presentation. Thank the audience for the interaction and the questions that they submitted. Thanks, SCA, for the space, and look forward to seeing many of you in John's course in Houston coming up in May. So thanks again.
Thank you.